Chapter 9 of The Silk Stocking Murders by Anthony Berkeley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Notes and Queries. Roger was thoughtful as he returned to the Albany that evening and mixed himself a nightcap before going to bed. This case was so different from his others that he was in danger of finding himself a little lost in it. With the others, it had always happened that he had a multiplicity of motives and possible criminals, so that a solution had involved merely the narrowing down of the evidence till it pointed definitely to one of the suspects. Here was the complete opposite. In place of several possible motives, there was, in reason, no motive at all, except that of a sexual lust murder planned by a twisted mentality, and in consequence the valuable pointer which an obvious motive affords, and which is, in 9 cases out of 10, the thing which first directs the attention of the police towards the person ultimately proved guilty, simply did not exist at all. Moreover, in place of the large company of former suspects was just blank nothingness. Nobody was suspect. Everybody was suspect. The canvas Roger had to survey was so vast that it might be considered as infinite. The whole world was suspect. He got into bed and tried to sleep, but his brain buzzed, revolving determinedly round the endless possibilities of the case. The note of optimism on which he had parted from Moresby had ceased to resound in his mind. The early hours of the night are no place for optimism. Before he had been in bed 30 minutes, he had decided once and for all that there could not be the slightest possibility of the same name appearing on both Anne Manners and Pladle's lists. A lucky coincidence like that belonged only to fiction. Things did not turn out that way in real life. No, he must give up that tenuous hope and find some other angle from which to attack the problem. And the annoying thing was that, out of all the puzzles he had tackled, this was the one, the most baffling of the lot, that he was most anxious to solve, for if he did not contribute something of very real value to the partnership which he had succeeded in inaugurating, he was quite certain that neither Moresby nor the authorities at Scotland Yard would ever let him on the inside of a really interesting case again. And Roger was extremely eager to be in on the inside of really interesting cases. He kicked and turned. It was too much to hope that he could solve the case off his own bat, with Moresby there as well and all the resources of Scotland Yard behind him. But he did want to direct the lines of the chase along the right trail. Moresby, of course, was concentrating on Lady Ursula's note, and if by any chance he could find out to whom it had been written, the case was as good as solved. But how could he? Was it worth Roger's while to concentrate on the note too? Hardly. At following up a single outstanding clue, Scotland Yard had no rival in the world. For an amateur to work on the same lines was simply a waste of time. No, he would leave that to Moresby, and if, against all probability, Moresby was successful, then he deserved all the credit. In the meantime, Roger would get to work in a different way, collecting all the infinitesimal data which Moresby was inclined to ignore, and trying to deduce something from them. And if he was successful, he would not only deserve the credit, but, so far as the authorities at Scotland Yard were concerned, would jolly well see that he got it. After Ludmouth, Roger was not at all inclined to stand modestly aside from a brilliantly successful solution in the manner of the storybook sleuths and present the blundering police detective with all the credit. He spent 2.5 hours in examining all the infinitesimal data and was unable to draw a single further deduction from them. He then rose, swallowed 3 aspirins in a strong whiskey and soda, and returned to bed. This time he got to sleep. On paying a visit to Scotland Yard at 11 o'clock the next morning, it gave him an infantile thrill to pass the guardian of the door with a nod and be allowed to proceed unquestioned to Moresby's room. He found the chief inspector seated at his table, concentrating. In front of him lay the note. Roger smiled, a secret smile. It was as if the prosaic Moresby were invoking its essence to rise up and proclaim its secret. "Morning, Mr. Sheringham," he said, with an abstracted nod. "Just take a look at this letter, will you? Notice anything queer about it?" Beyond what you pointed out, that it seems to have a little wear and tear? No. Ah, but what about the paper it's written on? I know nothing about papers, Roger smiled, seating himself on the edge of the table. That sort of thing is your prerogative. It's no good giving me a scrap of paper like that and expecting me to be able to furnish its complete history from the time it was a Celanese vest or whatever they do to make that kind of paper from. There was a gleam of triumph illuminating the chief inspector's rather stolid face. Scrap paper, eh? But you see, Mr. Sheringham, that's just what it isn't. Oh? Said Roger politely. It was clear that Moresby considered it of the highest importance that this scrap of paper should not be scrap paper, but exactly why Roger was unable to see. I'll buy it, he added. Explain the excitement. Even we poor boobs at Scotland Yard can make a deduction or two occasionally, Moresby grinned unkindly, even though we don't write clever articles about murderers' psychology for the newspapers. Just take a look at that piece of paper again, Mr. Sheringham. Feel it in your hand. That isn't scrap paper. It's a bit of real expensive note paper. Ah, said Roger, understanding. Yes, and it's been cut, went on Moresby, and there was a reason for the cutting. Now do you see what I mean? I do. The address has been cut off. Good for you. It would be a printed address, 10-1, and you can... And there was something cut off as well as the address, interrupted the chief inspector, who was making no bones about enjoying his own perspicacity. It has been mentioned in a former chronicle that even chief inspectors are human. He paused deliberately. I told you I'd buy it, Roger urged in humble tones. I'm surprised at you, Mr. Sheringham, the chief inspector mocked. I am, really. I thought you were such a one for clever deductions. You don't see what I mean, even now. Well, well, just think what you'd do if you were writing a note to a friend in a hurry like that, in his own rooms, too, as the wording of that note shows. Wouldn't you... Write the friend's name at the top and draw a line under it, Roger exclaimed. Yes, of course I should. Moresby, you're a genius. Well, you tumbled to it at last, said the chief inspector in distinctly disappointed tones. And I won't say it wasn't clever of you to think of that line, he added handsomely. When you did get there, just look at the right middle of the top edge. There. Roger examined the part of the paper indicated by Moresby's broad thumb. The extreme end of a penciled line was distinctly discernible. He nodded. And the paper's been carefully cut with a knife, he observed, turning it on edge. The chief inspector leaned back in his chair. This is how I look at it, Mr. Sheringham. If you study the creases in that paper, you'll see that the fold across the center doesn't exactly bisect its length. Look, it's nearly an inch out. Well, to do that is all wrong. It isn't natural, Roger interjected. No, it isn't. It's almost an instinct to fold a piece of paper as nearly mathematically exact as possible. Therefore, that paper was folded before the top was cut off. Therefore, we can tell from that the exact size of the missing bit. Therefore, we can tell also the exact size of the original sheet. I get you, said Roger. Moresby pressed a bell on his table. This is where Scotland Yard has the pull over an outsider, he said, and pulled a sheet of paper towards him. When the messenger appeared in answer to the bell, Moresby sent him in search of Sergeant Burroughs. Morning, Burroughs, he nodded a minute later, as a man with a particularly alert face entered the room. This is Mr. Sheringham, who's attached to us for a time. Here's a job for you, Burroughs. I want you to find out everything about the paper this note's written on. Take a look at it. I've noted down the description and the watermark for you here, and the size of the original sheet. This one's been cut, you see. Let me know who makes it, what stationers in London stock it, especially in the West End, and find out also the names of any clients who buy it, and still more, any who have an address printed on it as well. I've noted all that down for you, too. That's going to take you some time, so put 5 men on it. I want the full lists as soon as possible. Very good, sir, said Sergeant Burroughs, and made a smart exit. Yes, Roger agreed. That's where Scotland Yard has the pull. The chief inspector pulled out his pipe, and Roger offered his pouch. He was impressed. Moresby was going to play that note for all it was worth, and Roger could not help feeling that it was going to lead to discoveries in which he could claim no share. "By the way," he said, thinking it was time that his own end of the investigations was brought a little more to the fore, "by the way, here's that list of names I told you about that Miss Manners made out for me." He produced the list from his pocket and handed it across. "That's a copy for you to keep. I've got the original." The chief inspector ran his eyes down the 30-odd names as he filled his pipe. He commented. "Seems to have moved in pretty good society at home. Lord this and Sir somebody that and the Honorable the other. Her family was a pretty good one, and I expect they know most of the county set in those parts," Roger answered carelessly. "There's a lot of big houses in the neighborhood, and the children would mix. Seems funny none of those big pots did anything for her when she came up to London to get a job. I don't suppose for a moment that she asked them. They probably didn't even know she was looking for work. The Manners may be poor, but they're probably devilish proud, if I know the type." "Not too proud to show herself off on the stage as a showgirl, though," Moresby suggested, applying a match to Roger's tobacco. "What's that nowadays?" Roger retorted, a little irritably. "Don't be so infernally Victorian, Moresby." But the thought occurred to him that he would be very sorry to see Anne following in her younger sister's footsteps. Grunted Moresby, and went on studying the list in silence. Roger kicked his heels against the table leg. He had a strong feeling that he ought to be out and doing something, but for the life of him he could not see what. Moresby seemed to be doing all that could be done at the moment. That infernal note, was it going to take things out of his hands by providing the solution after all? Roger had an uneasy premonition that it was. Not without exasperation, he picked it up and examined it again. "Yes, this edge has been carefully cut with a sharp knife," he announced. "That argues premeditation, doesn't it?" The chief inspector looked up from his list. "Premeditation?" he echoed. "Why, yes, that's what I said last night." "So you did, and I was inclined to query it. Well, I think the cutting clinches that, though I still don't think that the place was premeditated, although the crime was. I should say that whoever did kill Lady Ursula had had the intention of doing so for some days, and carried the note about with him for the purpose of using it whenever an opportunity presented itself. The meeting at the studio was simply a chance one." "That's likely enough," Moresby agreed. "In fact, I wasn't too keen myself on the idea of an assignation at the studio. I just put it forward as a possibility we mustn't overlook." "Well, that might help things. You mean we could have a look round for someone with a good motive for killing Lady Ursula?" "No, I don't." Roger thumped the table crossly. "That's just the devil of this case. Motive doesn't help. We've got the motive for Lady Ursula's death. There it is, that note. When Lady Ursula dashed off that little note, she signed her own death warrant, as the storybooks say." "Ah," said the chief inspector with interest. "Yes, I hadn't looked at it that way. That's very ingenious, Mr. Sheringham." "But very obvious," Roger retorted, though not ill-pleased. "This maniac is on the constant lookout for victims, you see. A girl whose death he can't twist into the appearance of suicide is no use to him. He's very fond of killing, but he's running no risks himself, so far as he knows, and devilish cunning he is at avoiding them. Of course, for his particular methods, suicide is the safest camouflage. Well, when that note of Lady Ursula's falls into his hands, she's simply a gift, isn't she? There's his next victim booked at once. All he's got to do is to wait for his opportunity, and in the meantime carry that note about with him everywhere so as not to miss it when it comes. Elementary, my dear Moresby. But still leaving us pretty well where we were before, Mr. Holmes. But you're right about motive in this case, Mr. Sheringham, sir. It means we'll have nothing but circumstantial evidence about movements and that sort of thing to found our case on. In fact, however sure we may be one day of knowing between ourselves who the guilty party is, about all we'll ever be able to prove is opportunity. And what's the good of that?" "Not much," Roger confessed. They looked at one another gloomily. Without, that is, added the chief inspector, we have a bit of better luck next time. Next time? Echoed Roger. Yes, said the chief inspector matter-of-factly, the next girl that's murdered. Oh, said Roger. The telephone bell interrupted his unhappy musings. Yes, Moresby answered it. Yes, this is Chief Inspector Moresby speaking. Oh, yes. Good morning, sir. You have? Good. If you wouldn't mind, sir. Yes, as soon as you like. Very well, sir. He hung up the receiver. Plaidle, he said, coming round with that list. Ah, well, let's hope and pray we have a bit of luck there. I don't like sitting still like this while that brute may be planning to attack another girl at this very minute. But what can we do, sir? Moresby reasonably pointed out, not even knowing who he is yet. Humph, said Roger. There is nothing so irritating as reason when it does not happen to fit in with desire. I suppose he will go for another girl. No doubt of it, sir, responded the chief inspector with the greatest cheerfulness. Bound to. They always do, especially at this sort of stage. He's just tickled to death now with the idea of killing. Hasn't had time to cool off yet. They, added the chief inspector with a judicial air, kill about a dozen before they get tired of it. The deuce they do, said Roger violently. But look here, you can't leave this maniac loose without warning the public against him. You must put these wretched girls on their guard at least. And put him on his guard too? No, sir. That's no good. We'd never catch him that way, and he's too dangerous to be left without being caught, even if it does mean one more girl being killed before we get him. Her death may save a dozen others, but what we want to do is to get him first, and I'm going to push on my inquiries as fast as ever I can, now that I'm fairly certain that it is murder and a homicidal maniac that we're up against. Roger was unconvinced. He thought that a warning of some sort ought to be given, if only to unprotected girls living alone, prostitutes, and so on. He thought so strongly, and he said so with equal strength. The chief inspector remained adamant and pointed out from a long experience that it never does any good to warn prostitutes of anything. They rarely pay the slightest attention. In the middle of their argument, Plaidle was announced. He greeted them with his usual grave, collected courtesy, which had an old-fashioned air in so young a man, and produced the list he had brought. Without even glancing at it, Moresby tossed it carelessly onto his desk and engaged Plaidle in a brief conversation, asking what his movements were going to be that day in case Moresby wanted to get hold of him suddenly. Plaidle outlined them roughly and promised to ring up Scotland Yard and leave word should he change his plans to any extent during the day. He had seemed a little surprised at the request to do so, but had complied with the utmost readiness. Roger, watching him, saw that he had not yet arrived at the full truth concerning his fiancée's death. He stayed about 5 minutes only, and immediately the door had closed behind him, the two laid out the lists side by side and pored over them eagerly. "Ah," said Roger an instant later. "Hullo!" exclaimed Moresby the next moment. "Great jumping Jupiters!" shouted Roger within a second. There was not merely one name that coincided on both lists, but 3. End of chapter 9.